The small town of Loxham had always prided itself on its quiet charm, a place where the biggest scandal might involve a neighbour's unkempt garden. But beneath its idyllic surface lay secrets darker than anyone could imagine. When Sheriff William Crane, the man sworn to protect and serve, was exposed for his dangerous double life, the town was forced to confront the unthinkable. What began as whispers of impropriety changed into a deadly web of manipulation, betrayal, and tragedy that would haunt Loxham forever. At the center of it all was a teenage girl who never imagined the price she would pay for trusting the wrong man. In a quiet corner of rural England, the village of Loxham had always been a place where routine and predictability ruled. The town square, with its cobblestone streets and ivy-covered brick buildings, bustled only during market days. Children rode their bicycles along narrow lanes, and church bells marked the passing hours. At the heart of this seemingly idyllic community stood Sheriff William Crane, a man held in high regard by the locals. With nearly 2 decades of service, he had become a fixture in the town's landscape. At 43, he was a picture of authority, broad-shouldered, tall, with greying hair that only seemed to bolster his aura of experience. To many, William wasn't just a lawman, he was a neighbour, a friend, and for some, a saviour in moments of distress. He lived in a modest yet comfortable house on the outskirts of the village, with his wife Margaret and their 2 teenage sons. His family was his pride, or at least that's what he projected to the world. Margaret was the dutiful wife, ever present at church events and town gatherings, while their boys, Edward and James, were popular in school and excelled in sports. The Cranes seemed like the embodiment of small-town perfection, yet, as is often the case, appearances can be deceiving. Beneath William's polished exterior lay a man battling demons of restlessness and temptation. It started subtly, as these things often do. Ruby Marshall was a 17-year-old girl with a radiant smile and an innocence about her that made her stand out in the village. She had recently moved to Loxham with her family after her father took a job managing a nearby farm. Ruby was striking, long auburn hair that gleamed in the sunlight, bright green eyes that seemed to hold boundless curiosity, and a shy demeanor that made her both approachable and mysterious. She worked part-time at the village bakery, often serving William his morning coffee and pastry. At first their exchanges were entirely appropriate. A friendly good morning, a polite thank you. Ruby saw William as the authoritative yet kind sheriff who greeted everyone with the same warm smile, but over time their interactions grew longer. William started lingering at the counter, asking Ruby about her day, her family, her plans. To her, it felt like a harmless friendship with someone who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts. To William, it became something else entirely. Ruby's innocence and youthful charm stirred something in William that he hadn't felt in years. His marriage, while stable, had grown dull. Margaret, consumed with the routines of family life, rarely looked at him the way she once did. Their conversations were limited to household matters, school schedules, bills, errands. With Ruby, William felt seen. Her laughter, her attentiveness, her youthful energy all acted as a balm to his midlife insecurities. The shift from casual friendliness to something more inappropriate was subtle enough to escape immediate notice. William began frequenting the bakery more often, sometimes twice a day. He'd compliment Ruby's baking skills, ask about her schoolwork, and joke about her future as a master baker. Ruby, flattered by the attention from someone so respected, began to look forward to his visits. One rainy afternoon, William offered Ruby a ride home from work. The downpour had caught the entire village off guard, and Ruby, without an umbrella, had been preparing for a miserable walk in the rain. William, ever the gentleman, insisted she shouldn't get soaked. Ruby hesitated but eventually accepted. It was the first time they were alone together, and the ride passed with light conversation about the weather and the bakery. After that, giving Ruby rides became a regular occurrence. William justified it to himself as a kind gesture. After all, he was helping a young girl avoid the long, often lonely walk home. Ruby, naive to the complexities of adult intentions, saw nothing wrong with accepting the sheriff's help. Over weeks these car rides became longer, with detours to the scenic country roads surrounding Loxham. They'd talk about everything: music, books, her dreams of studying art in London. For William, it was intoxicating to be the center of Ruby's attention, to feel young and valued in a way his marriage no longer provided. The turning point came during the village's annual harvest festival. The event was a major highlight in Loxham, bringing together families for games, music, and a shared feast. Ruby had volunteered to help decorate the town hall, and William, overseeing security for the event, spent much of the day near her. Their interactions were more frequent, and their body language hadn't gone unnoticed by a few observant villagers. Margaret, busy organizing the bake sale, didn't seem to notice her husband's lingering glances toward Ruby. That evening, as the festival wrapped up, William found Ruby alone, packing away decorations. He offered to walk her home, saying it wasn't safe for a young girl to be out so late. Ruby, trusting him implicitly, agreed. The walk was filled with laughter and easy conversation, but as they reached her home, William made a comment that lingered in Ruby's mind long after. He told her she was special, unlike anyone he'd ever met. He proceeded to say, unlike anyone he'd ever met. The words, simple on the surface, carried a weight that Ruby didn't fully understand but instinctively felt. From that moment, their interactions became increasingly clandestine. William would text Ruby late at night, using a secondary phone he kept hidden from Margaret. He'd ask about her day, her thoughts, her feelings. Ruby, flattered and confused, found herself caught in a web of attention she didn't entirely know how to navigate. William, on the other hand, began to lose sight of the line between right and wrong. As weeks turned into months, their meetings became more secretive. William would drive out to the edges of the village, picking Ruby up under the pretense of discussing her future plans. He convinced himself that he was mentoring her, guiding her through the challenges of young adulthood. But deep down, he knew his feelings had crossed a line. It wasn't long before rumors began to circulate. Loxham was a small village, and people noticed patterns. William's frequent visits to the bakery, the whispered conversations at the festival, the late-night drives. Margaret, ever the supportive wife, dismissed the rumors as baseless gossip. But others weren't so quick to ignore the signs. The turning point came one cold December evening. Ruby's father, returning home early from work, spotted William's patrol car parked outside their house. He entered to find William sitting with Ruby in the living room, both looking startled by his arrival. While the scene itself wasn't incriminating, the tension in the air was undeniable. Ruby's father didn't say much at the time, but the encounter planted a seed of suspicion that would soon grow into a full-blown investigation. Unknown to William, Ruby's father began keeping a closer watch on his daughter's interactions with the sheriff. What he discovered shook the entire village of Loxham to its core. If you're enjoying this story, don't miss out on the next shocking true crime documentary we're about to reveal. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a twist like this again. Ruby's father, a reserved and pragmatic man named David Marshall, wasn't one to jump to conclusions. Yet the image of Sheriff William Crane sitting in his living room, looking both composed and uneasy, lingered in his mind. Something about the situation felt off. David began to notice patterns that hadn't seemed significant before. He noticed William's patrol car passing their house at odd hours, the way Ruby would brighten at the mention of the sheriff, and the frequency with which she stayed late at the bakery. Determined to protect his daughter, David resolved to find out the truth, no matter how unsettling it might be. David decided to monitor Ruby's phone. He wasn't proud of the decision, but his instincts told him that something wasn't right. Late one night, while Ruby was asleep, he unlocked her phone and began scrolling through her messages. At first there was nothing unusual. Chats with friends, school group discussions, and social media notifications. The tone of the conversation was friendly but laced with familiarity that seemed inappropriate for a man William's age and position. The text confirmed David's suspicions. William had been texting Ruby regularly, asking about her day, sharing personal anecdotes, and even making comments about her beauty. Though the messages stopped short of being explicitly inappropriate, they crossed a boundary no adult should cross with a teenager. David felt a surge of anger and disbelief. This was the man the entire village trusted, the man who was supposed to uphold the law, not exploit his position. David confronted Ruby the next morning, asking her about her relationship with William. Ruby, caught off guard, insisted that nothing improper was happening. She saw William as a mentor, someone who genuinely cared about her future. But David wasn't convinced. He warned her to stay away from the sheriff, emphasizing that no good could come from their interactions. Ruby, torn between loyalty to her father and the attention she had grown to crave from William, promised to distance herself. David, however, wasn't content with leaving the matter there. He reached out to the village council, sharing his concerns in a private meeting. The council members, shocked by the allegations, agreed to investigate quietly. They couldn't afford to tarnish William's reputation without concrete evidence, but they also couldn't ignore the possibility that he had abused his power. In the weeks that followed, the council's suspicions grew. William's behavior became more erratic as he tried to maintain his secret relationship with Ruby while dealing with the mounting scrutiny. He became short-tempered at work, lashing out at his deputies for minor mistakes. His patrol routes grew less predictable, often taking him far from the areas he was assigned to monitor. People began to notice his absence from community events, where he had once been a regular fixture. Ruby, meanwhile, struggled with the weight of the situation. She felt trapped between her father's warnings and William's insistence that their connection was harmless. The attention she once found flattering now felt suffocating, and she began to realize the extent of William's control over her. She tried to pull away, avoiding his texts and declining his offers for rides home. But William was persistent. He would show up unannounced at the bakery, waiting for her shift to end, or park his patrol car near her house, watching for any sign of her. The situation came to a head on January 15th, a cold and foggy evening that seemed to shroud the village in an ominous silence. Ruby had just finished her shift at the bakery and was walking home when William pulled up beside her. He insisted on giving her a ride, claiming it was unsafe for her to walk alone at night. Ruby reluctantly agreed, knowing she couldn't avoid him forever. As they drove through the winding country roads, William grew agitated. He accused Ruby of avoiding him, of listening to her father's lies. Ruby tried to calm him, but her words only seemed to fuel his anger. The tension in the car was unbearable, and Ruby felt a growing sense of fear. She realized that the man she once saw as a protector had become someone she no longer recognized. Meanwhile, David, concerned that Ruby hadn't returned home, decided to drive through the village to look for her. He knew she often took the back roads to avoid traffic, and his gut told him to head in that direction. As he turned onto one of the narrow lanes, his headlights illuminated a parked patrol car. His heart sank as he recognized the license plate. Inside the car, the situation had escalated. William's anger had turned to desperation, and Ruby's attempts to reason with him only made things worse. When David approached the car, he found Ruby visibly shaken and William visibly tense. The confrontation that followed was heated, with David demanding that William leave Ruby alone, and William accusing David of meddling in something he didn't understand. Unbeknownst to all three, a passing driver had witnessed the confrontation and reported it to the local authorities. Within minutes, deputies arrived at the scene, their flashing lights piercing through the fog. The situation quickly moved out of control. William, feeling cornered, refused to step away from Ruby, prompting the deputies to intervene. What happened next would forever change the lives of everyone involved. As the deputies tried to de-escalate the situation, William reached for his service weapon. Whether it was an act of defiance or desperation, no one could say for sure. But the deputies, acting on instinct, fired their weapons, striking William in the chest. He collapsed to the ground, his blood staining the frost-covered grass. Ruby screamed as she watched the man she once admired take his last breath. David held her tightly, shielding her from the gruesome scene. The deputies, shaken by what had just happened, called for medical assistance, but it was too late. William Crane, the respected sheriff of Loxham, was dead. The aftermath of that night sent shockwaves through the village. News of the incident spread quickly, with everyone speculating about what had truly happened between William and Ruby. An investigation revealed the extent of William's inappropriate behavior, including text messages, phone records, and witness statements. Ruby and her family were thrust into the spotlight, with journalists hounding them for interviews and villagers whispering behind their backs. David, while relieved that his daughter was safe, struggled with guilt over the role he played in the tragedy. Ruby, meanwhile, faced a long road to recovery, haunted by memories of a relationship that had started with trust and ended in betrayal. As for Loxham, the village would never be the same. The image of Sheriff Crane, once a symbol of safety and stability, was now a reminder of the fragility of trust and the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface. In the days following the sheriff's death, the quiet village of Loxham became a stage for turmoil. Media vans lined the cobbled streets, reporters eager to dissect every aspect of the case. The people of Loxham, accustomed to their sleepy routines, now found themselves at the center of national attention. Whispers of shame, betrayal, and unanswered questions filled every corner. Many struggled to reconcile the man they had once revered with the evidence now laid bare before them. For Ruby, life turned into an unrelenting nightmare. At just 16, she was thrust into a whirlwind of blame and scrutiny. Headlines sensationalized her role in the tragedy, labeling her everything from a victim to an instigator. Strangers sent hateful messages, calling her a seductress who had lured a trusted man to his doom. Ruby's face appeared in newspapers and on TV screens, her name debated endlessly by people who had never met her. At school, her peers divided into camps. Some pitied her, whispering about how she had been manipulated by a man much older and in a position of power. Others ostracized her, accusing her of destroying the town's reputation. The bullying became relentless. Notes left in her locker calling her vile names, whispers in the hallway, and stares that burned into her soul. She withdrew from everyone. The vibrant girl she once was, now a shadow of herself. Ruby's family faced their own challenges. Her father, David, became a figure of controversy. Some praised him for standing up to Sheriff Crane and protecting his daughter. Others blamed him, claiming that his confrontation had pushed William over the edge. David refused to speak to reporters, despite their constant presence outside the family home. Instead, he focused on shielding Ruby, even as his own guilt consumed him. Behind closed doors, David questioned every decision he had made. He replayed the moments leading up to that fateful night, wondering if he could have handled things differently. Could he have prevented the sheriff's fixation on Ruby earlier? Was there a way to protect his daughter without the situation escalating into violence? The questions tormented him, robbing him of sleep and peace. The village council, too, faced a reckoning. They had ignored earlier warning signs about William's behavior, chalking it up to stress or eccentricity. Now, with his actions exposed, they were forced to confront their negligence. Investigations revealed that William had been engaging in questionable behavior for years. Complaints from female residents about his overly familiar behavior had been dismissed, his reputation as the village's protector shielding him from suspicion. The revelations sent shockwaves through the community. Women came forward with their own unsettling experiences involving William. He had visited homes under the guise of community safety checks, lingering too long and making inappropriate comments. Though none had spoken up before, the tragic end to his story emboldened them to share their truths. As the weeks passed, Ruby's case became a legal quagmire. Authorities needed to determine whether her relationship with William had crossed into illegal territory. While there was no evidence of physical intimacy, the text messages revealed emotional manipulation and inappropriate advances. Legal experts debated whether William's actions constituted grooming. Given Ruby's age and his position of authority, Ruby was questioned multiple times by law enforcement and child protection services. Each session left her drained, as she was forced to relive moments she desperately wanted to forget. The interrogations probed into every detail of her relationship with William, painting him as both a predator and a man who had lost his way. Ruby herself struggled to make sense of it. She had once seen him as a mentor, a guiding figure who made her feel special. Now she saw the cracks in that illusion, the way he had exploited her youthful naivety. The sheriff's family became another focal point of the community's ire. His widow, Margaret Crane, had been a pillar of the church and charity groups. The discovery of William's double life shattered her world. Overnight, she went from being admired to being pitied, or, in some cases, scorned. People questioned whether she had known about his behavior and turned a blind eye. Margaret maintained her silence, refusing to speak publicly about her husband. William's 2 adult children, who lived in other parts of the country, were forced to reckon with their father's legacy. They issued a brief statement expressing their shock and sorrow over the events, but avoided further involvement. To them, William had been a loving father and a dedicated public servant. The revelations about his actions in Loxham left them grappling with questions of their own. Ruby's mental health began to deteriorate. The constant scrutiny, coupled with her feelings of guilt and betrayal, became unbearable. She refused to leave the house, terrified of encountering the harsh judgment of the villagers. David did his best to support her, but his own struggles made it difficult for him to be the anchor she needed. Recognizing the severity of the situation, a local counsellor volunteered to work with Ruby. The sessions provided a safe space for her to process her emotions and untangle the web of manipulation William had spun around her. The counsellor helped her understand that she had been a victim, that the blame for what had happened rested squarely on William's shoulders. Meanwhile, the village of Loxham began the slow process of healing. Community leaders organized forums to address the issues raised by the tragedy. They implemented stricter guidelines for public officials, ensuring that no one could abuse their power as William had. Support groups were established for victims of harassment, providing a platform for people to share their experiences and seek help. Ruby's family decided to leave Loxham. The memories of what had happened were too painful to endure, and they hoped for a fresh start in a new town. The decision was bittersweet. They would leave behind the home where Ruby had grown up, but they would also leave behind the weight of the past. On the day they moved, Ruby stood in her empty bedroom, looking out at the familiar streets one last time. She felt a mixture of sadness and relief. The events of the past months had forever changed her, stripping away her innocence but also teaching her resilience. As she closed the door behind her, she resolved to rebuild her life, one step at a time. The story of Sheriff William Crane and Ruby Marshall would remain a cautionary tale in Loxham for years to come. It was a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of vigilance in protecting the vulnerable. While the village eventually returned to its quiet routine, the scars of that tragic chapter remained, etched into its collective memory. For Ruby and her family, the road ahead was uncertain, but they carried with them a determination to move forward, to find peace in the aftermath of chaos, and in the end, that resilience was their greatest triumph. Months after leaving Loxham, Ruby and her family settled in a small town on the outskirts of Bristol. The new environment offered a semblance of peace, free from the accusing stares and whispers that had followed them back in the village. Their modest house, nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac, became a sanctuary where they could attempt to rebuild their lives. Yet the shadows of the past lingered, manifesting in ways both subtle and overwhelming. For Ruby, each day was a battle. The trauma of her entanglement with Sheriff Crane haunted her, intruding into her thoughts without warning. Nights were the hardest. Sleep eluded her, replaced by vivid nightmares that replayed the moments she wished she could forget. In her dreams, she would see William's face, sometimes kind, sometimes predatory, and wake up gasping for air, her heart racing as if she were still trapped in that web of manipulation. David, her father, bore his own burden. He struggled with guilt over his role in the events that had unfolded. Though he had acted out of love and a fierce need to protect his daughter, the consequences of his confrontation with William weighed heavily on him. He rarely spoke about that night, but the strain showed in the lines etched deeper into his face and the heaviness in his demeanor. Ruby's mother, Caroline, tried to hold the family together. She took on a part-time job at a local bakery, hoping that the routine would bring some normalcy to their lives. Caroline was fiercely protective of Ruby, accompanying her to therapy sessions and keeping a close watch on her emotional well-being. But even she could not escape the toll of what had happened. There were moments when she would retreat to the bathroom, locking the door and silently crying, overwhelmed by the enormity of what her family had endured. The therapy sessions Ruby attended became her lifeline. Her counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Elaine Carter, specialized in trauma recovery, In their sessions, Ruby was encouraged to unpack her feelings, to confront the conflicting emotions she held toward William. There was anger at how he had manipulated her, at the way he had abused his position of power. There was shame over how easily she had been drawn into his world, over the attention the relationship had brought to her family, and there was confusion about how someone she had once admired could have caused so much pain. Dr. Carter helped Ruby understand that she was not to blame. William had taken advantage of her youth and naivety, using his authority to groom her in ways she couldn't have recognized at the time. The counselor emphasized that Ruby's survival was a testament to her strength, reminding her that she had every right to reclaim her life. Despite the progress Ruby made in therapy, the journey was far from linear. There were setbacks, moments when she would isolate herself, refusing to eat or leave her room. The media coverage of the case had died down, but Ruby's name would occasionally resurface in articles or online discussions. Each time, it reopened old wounds, pulling her back into the darkest moments of her life. Her family's new neighbors, unaware of their history, were kind but cautious. They noticed the guarded way Ruby carried herself, the way her parents seemed perpetually on edge. Some speculated quietly among themselves, trying to piece together the reasons for the family's apparent secrecy. Caroline and David avoided sharing too much, determined to shield Ruby from any potential judgment. Ruby tried to find solace in small joys. She took long walks in the nearby countryside, where the rolling hills and open skies offered a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in months. She rediscovered her love for drawing, filling sketchbooks with images of nature and abstract designs. Art became a therapeutic outlet, a way to express the emotions she struggled to put into words. Meanwhile, the legacy of Sheriff William Crane continued to unravel. Investigations into his tenure as sheriff revealed a pattern of misconduct that extended far beyond his relationship with Ruby. Several women came forward with allegations of inappropriate behavior, detailing encounters where William had used his authority to intimidate or manipulate them. The revelations painted a picture of a man who had operated with impunity for years, shielded by his reputation and the small-town dynamics that discouraged scrutiny. The town of Loxham was forced to confront its complicity in William's actions. Community leaders issued statements acknowledging their failure to address earlier complaints, promising reforms to prevent future abuses of power. Training programs were implemented for law enforcement officials, emphasizing the importance of accountability and ethical behavior. The town's police department underwent a complete overhaul, with new leadership brought in to restore public trust. For Ruby, the news of these changes brought a mixture of relief and bitterness. She was glad that others would be protected from suffering as she had, but the knowledge that so much pain could have been avoided if action had been taken earlier weighed heavily on her. She often wondered how different her life might have been if someone had spoken up, if someone had challenged William before his actions escalated. As months turned into years, Ruby began to find a sense of stability. She enrolled in an art program at a local community college, where she met others who shared her passion for creativity. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of belonging, a chance to redefine herself outside the shadow of her past. David and Caroline also found ways to heal. David started attending a support group for parents of trauma survivors, where he connected with others who understood his struggles. Sharing his story helped him process his feelings of guilt and anger, giving him the strength to support Ruby in her journey. Caroline continued to work at the bakery, finding comfort in the routine and the camaraderie of her co-workers. Though their lives would never be the same, the Marshall family learned to navigate their new reality. They carried the scars of their experiences, but they also carried the lessons they had learned about resilience, love, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Ruby's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of protecting the vulnerable. She eventually began speaking at events and workshops, sharing her experiences to raise awareness about grooming and abuse of authority. Her voice, once silenced by fear and shame, became a powerful tool for change. In time, the name William Crane faded from public memory, but Ruby's impact endured. Her courage inspired others to speak out, to challenge systems that allowed abuse to go unpunished. She transformed her pain into purpose, proving that even in the face of unimaginable adversity, it was possible to rebuild, to heal, and to find hope. And so, in a quiet town far from where the tragedy began, Ruby Marshall found her footing. She was no longer the girl defined by what had happened to her. She was an artist, an advocate, a survivor. And though the past would always be a part of her story, it no longer defined her future. By subscribing to our channel, you'll gain access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content and deeper dives into true crime stories that you won't find anywhere else. Don't wait. Subscribe now and stay informed.